Joining us now from Washington, D.C., I'm in Jacksonville, is House of Representative Tom Garrett, Congressman, 5th District in Virginia, Republican, huge district, bigger than Delaware, bigger than Rhode Island. Can't drive from one end to the other without packing lunch and dinner. And he's with us now right in the middle of the fray. Tom Garrett, good to have you.
It's bigger than New Jersey plus Vermont. How are you doing?
I know, New Jersey, Vermont, it's so huge. I'm doing fine here in the Sunshine State.
Good chock-a-block full of good rural people like myself. How is John Frederick expanding into the Sunshine State? This is a dark day for humanity. Do they have any idea what they've gotten into?
They want to hear Tom Garrett. Florida wants to know about Tom Garrett. That's why they took my show. They were like, hey, who's this guy Garrett that you get on? We want him. I said, well, it's a 2-for package. You get me, you get him. That's why I'm here. Everybody's tuned in. They want to hear Tom Garrett in Florida.
Because, when is the 6th District Convention, John Fredericks?
It's May 19th. You know what? I don't want to really go because it's Harrisonburg, 5 hours away. It's just a pain in the butt. I know that I'm going to be on the air like 8 hours. But, you know, I got a lot of people texting me, said, look, we got to bring transparency there. But if Tom Garrett goes, I'll go. What do you think, Tom?
Let me check the calendar. Maybe
if you go and come on my show live at the JMU Convention Center, besides, your convention was, I mean, in the 5th District, see, that was a cool convention, right? Because it was honest, and like everybody got the delegates, and you ran your convention, and you raised money, and it was honest up front. Some people like me think it's been rigged from the beginning for Dunbar. So I think we should go, but if you go, I'll go.
Well, let's have your people talk to my people. I always wanted to say that.
It fits in this situation. Now, let's get to the questions. You're a lawyer. The questions leaked to the New York Times that Mueller wants to ask Trump, and now the threat of a subpoena. And, Congressman, what do you make of this whole thing right now?
Well, as I understand it, and I have to admit that I do have some other things going on. The focus of their investigation has nothing to do with collusion, but instead an assertion that there might have been obstruction by virtue of an interest by the chief executive under Article 2 of the Constitution in removing someone who fell under the purview constitutionally of the chief executive under Article 2 of the Constitution. And I pause for dramatic effect because I'm not terribly sure how that could be illegal. But maybe the special counsel enabling legislation is sacrosanct and supersedes the Constitution. Maybe there's been an additional amendment to the Constitution when I wasn't looking that said no provisions herein shall affect the special counsel or the Attorney General of the United States shall not be removed even by the individual given constitutional power to remove the Attorney General of the United States should it not please the party not currently occupying the executive office. Maybe that's there and I just missed it.
So from what you're saying, you don't really think that the Mueller team has got the power to subpoena?
I don't think. I mean, look, everybody's afraid to say no because they are afraid of the political fallout. But I think if you do a study of the law and whose responsibility it is to do what, that it's within the purview of the office of the president to appoint or remove at will an attorney general or an individual appointed thereunder. So if you're allowed to fire somebody, how can it be obstruction of justice to consider firing somebody?
I just have to say this one thing because I think you're spot on, Congressman. Just absolutely nailed it. I was on a TV show yesterday and broadcasting back to Europe and the Middle East, and they asked me, they said one of the questions that they want to ask your president is, why did you fire James Comey? And I'm like, well, he fired James Comey because the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who hired the special counsel and appointed them,
you should fire James Comey,
sent him a letter saying you should fire James Comey. So he fired James Comey based on the recommendation of his Deputy Attorney General, who's in charge of the FBI, who then turned around and ignited a special counsel because he took his advice. Why is this never
Well, again, I mean, I want people to read the Constitution. I know it's a novel concept, and usually they just read the Huffington Post Cliff Notes. But the president is responsible for appointing individuals inside the executive branch at a certain level, and they work at will. That's a legal term of art, subject to the desires of the president based on the president's assessment of the interests of the execution of his oath. This is not hard stuff. Now, nobody else is saying this, which makes me wonder if I'm some sort of super lawyer or if I'm just, for some reason, haven't gotten the memo that I'm not allowed to point out that the emperor has no clothes, right? I mean, this is if you read the Constitution, everything he's done, he is constitutionally enabled to do. Now we've got some subsequently passed law, and by subsequently, I mean over 200 years later, I believe, that apparently is sacrosanct, that I suppose obviates the Constitution. I mean, I'm being ridiculous with intent. This makes no sense legally.
It makes no sense. What do you think about the fact that these leaks continue to go out? Like, who do you think leaked these questions, and is that an issue?
I don't know. I was tickled, though. I was driving down the road the other day in my district, which is bigger than New Jersey plus Delaware, and I heard, I don't know, AP Radio News report that there were 46 questions, which I thought was the best way they could make 48 sound like a small number. But I've done a lot. I've done murder trials.
Right.
I don't usually get 48 questions on a direct examination. I don't usually need 48 questions on a direct examination. I'm not sure I've ever asked, I'm serious, 48 questions on a direct examination. But that's pretty exhaustive. Who do I think leaked it? I don't know. I mean, walk down a random street in Washington, look at all the individuals in formal or business attire, and randomly point your finger at one. I guess you have as good a chance as anybody because the town leaks like a sieve.
No question about that. We're with Tom Garrett, Republican Congressman from the 5th District of Virginia. That is kind of the central rural Virginia area, Lynchburg on down. And it's hard to explain, but it's a very big district, not like they have in states with high populations like Florida, where they're quite small. I want to get to the moving of the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem, and then Benjamin Netanyahu coming out on TV the other day and saying he's got evidence that Iran is building a nuclear arsenal. Here's my question. Rather than come out on TV with a big statement, why not just fire up the Israeli jets and take out the arsenal and then send us a memo? Why go on TV?
Well, what do you think might be the reasonably predictable outcome of the Israelis traversing the airspace of Jordan and Iraq to get to Iran to take out a nuclear arsenal that is undoubtedly, or a nuclear program, I should say, that is undoubtedly hardened to the best of their capability and protected by very, very cutting-edge air defenses? I mean, ultimately, I think if the Israelis thought it was something within their reasonable ability to accomplish, that would be a step in the decision matrix. But the stakes are incredibly high. The region is already teetering after 8 years of complete neglect from the United States, the former leader in foreign policy globally. And I'll tell you this, as it relates to the documentation that Netanyahu cites, I would submit that it is the tip of the iceberg. There was a guy who was involved in U.S. foreign policy. I think his name was Barack Obama. You might have heard of him, who said there's no way to guarantee after 10 years that the Iranians don't go nuclear. That was what and that was his assessment of the Iranian nuclear deal. The Iranian nuclear deal literally loosened the controls that existed by virtue of the UN Security Council on Iran's development of ballistic missiles. It did not tighten them. It literally loosened them. The UN had passed a resolution through the Security Council to include the signatures of Russia and China that said Iran shall not undertake the development of ballistic missiles that might be used to deliver a nuclear payload. The Iran nuclear deal, brokered by John Kerry under President Obama, says Iran is called upon not to. Now, back to lawyering again, as we bore your listeners to tears. Mm-hmm. There's a huge difference between shall not and is called upon not to. If you really want to be sort of enlightened, there's an NPR story that you can Google, NPR of all places, that was written right after Iran did a series of ballistic missile tests right after President Trump took office, where he said, you all have violated the JCPOA, the Iran nuke deal. And they said, oh, no, we haven't. And the analysis was that they actually hadn't, because the Iran nuke deal allowed them to test. It just called upon them not to. There's a difference between don't come in my house and I'd prefer it if you don't come in my house. And that's the language we ended up with. I had the opportunity in the videos up on YouTube under Congressman Tom Garrett to question one of the gentlemen who claims to have been an architect of the Iran nuclear deal in the Foreign Affairs Committee. By the time I was done with him, I was afraid he was going to break out in tears. But he said, well, this was the best we could get. To which I asked, well, if it was the best we could get, why'd you do it? Because it's weaker than the existing regulations. And he literally had no answer. So this is a guy who came in the room boasting of having brokered the deal and left the room hanging his head because he couldn't answer pretty basic questions. So it's a bad situation. It was Obama administration, State Department officials who said President Trump, on the record publicly, inherited a horrible situation in North Korea. That was because of 2 administrations worth of inattentiveness. The Bush administration named them to the axis of evil and then proceeded to do almost nothing. The Obama administration looked the other way and kicked the can down the road. And then we had nuclear tests from the North Koreans about the time President Trump was taking office. So you do the best you can where you find yourself.
Well, do you think the president is going to scrap this deal?
Well, I'm in an interesting spot here because I know more than I'm allowed to talk about on the air, but I'll tell you this. There's work afoot that to renegotiate some aspects of the deal, to include certain countries in the EU. I think there's progress being made, and we'll see what happens.
All right. I'll take that answer at face value with no follow-ups. I'll read between the lines, and so will our audience. Thank you.
I think we're trying to get the best deal we can get to ensure that Iran, which I would argue with ICBMs is an existential threat to the existence of humanity, doesn't reach that capability.
Right. So one way or the other, that's the goal as it relates to whether or not the president renews or renegotiates the JCPOA, which is basically the acronym for the Iran deal.
That's right. And it's interesting, too, because the JCPOA is a comprehensive agreement. It's not a treaty. So this is another thing that the people in the mainstream media don't point out. It was never ratified by the Senate because they didn't have the votes. Any number of Democrats vehemently opposed the Iran nuclear deal when it was being negotiated. Now that President Trump's in office and he wants to change it, crickets and criticism. So it makes no sense to me. There's no intellectual honesty there. We're just there are people trying to score political points with the potential of literally hundreds of millions of human lives in the balance.
Not good. Not good. Thank you for that. I think you have elaborated to the extent that we understand going forward what the objective is, and whether it's going to be renegotiated or scrapped, the objective remains in mind. This is a bad deal, as the president said. The foundations of it are rotten. It was just poorly put together. So renegotiating it, he says, off of a poorly laid foundation is going to be very difficult to do. So
let's keep going for a second. So essentially, I think the best I can determine, the hope of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, was that we would buy 10 years, because that's all it does. Again, President Obama said after 10 years there are no guarantees the Iranians don't go nuclear. They would buy 10 years, and in those 10 years, we might witness peaceful regime change in Iran. Now, again, if you go to Congressman Tom Garrett on YouTube, there are any numbers of videos of myself and others in the Foreign Affairs Committee working to encourage peaceful regime change in Iran. Having said that, peaceful is a relative term. The Iranian IRGC and Quds forces are literally arresting and murdering Iranian citizens every day for dissent. And so they were going to hope that there was a regime change and that the new regime might steer away from nuclear ambitions without doing anything to encourage that outcome. And in fact, while directly funneling, quite literally, pallets of currency into Iran, which only upholds the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is essentially the primary mechanism that the mullahs use to retain power through fear and violence and intimidation. Mm-hmm. So they were hoping to have an outcome while not working towards that outcome, and in fact doing things that would help prevent that outcome. It makes no sense at all.
Okay.
It's like hoping to get better gas mileage by buying a Cadillac Escalade.
Yeah. Look, I think the way you framed this has been very, very helpful for all of us trying to understand it, and I thank you for that. We are out of time for this segment. I want to thank Congressman Tom Garrett, Republican from Central Virginia area, his district bigger than New Jersey and Delaware combined. We want to thank him for being with us, and we look forward to seeing him sharing in my misery at the May 19th 6th District Convention in Harrisonburg, Virginia.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we'll have him on our show because I got to cover it because somebody's got to just bring transparency. So you can just hit a button, download my app, just hit it, and we got the mics open, and we're going to bring you all of the action. And Tom Garrett's going, and maybe we'll get lucky, and he'll bring his lovely wife and his baby there, too. So that'll be like triple bonus, right?
I love my wife. Why would I want to do that to her? I haven't even committed to go yet. Don't get me in trouble, Fredericks.
I asked the Fräulein if she would go, and she had gone to the RPV convention, obviously, last May, I guess, or whenever it was, in Harrisonburg, and we went through the Harrisonburg, the heist, and the Cuccinelli threatening the convention, and we lost 3 of our Trump delegates, and they went back on the deal, and, of course, I was there broadcasting it, plus I was supposed to manage it, and so she said, I would rather get 3 of my teeth pulled out of my head with no Novocaine than go back to another Harrisonburg convention. So she's not going. So my only hope is Tom Garrett. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth. Thanks for being with us. More information, garrett.house.com.